when I've spoken to clients about this, the reason why they sometimes feel uncomfortable in social settings is because they're already showing up to them drained. They're not doing the things in their personal life. They're not giving themselves permission, and they're not also having the cooperation from their environment to be able to recharge their energy enough to show up to that social setting and experience it.
Hello, and welcome to episode 120 of the Quiet and Strong podcast, especially for introverts. I'm your host, David Hall, and the creator of quietandstrong.com. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to understanding the strengths and needs of introverts. Introversion is not something to fix, but to be embraced. Normally, we'll air each episode on a Monday. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform. Leave a review. That would mean a lot to me. Tell a friend about the podcast and help get the word out there that introversion is a beautiful thing. Jess Cabrera is an introvert who broke free from a 10-year-long cycle of overwhelm and burnout by doing what she was cautioned against, being herself. She then founded Introverts Can, a resource and coaching service that helps ambitious introverts who are overwhelmed, overstimulated, go from drained to energized. She does this by helping them create new habits that serve their needs and wants as introverts. The results? More energy, more confidence, and more self-trust. All right. Welcome to the Quiet and Strong podcast, Jess. I'm so excited to have you on today.
I am so excited to be here with you today. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We're going to get into the work you do coaching introverts. But let's start out with you. Tell us about yourself. How did you figure out that you were an introvert, and how did you embrace that to find success and now coach other introverts?
This is an interesting story. At least I think so. Because I've always been aware of my introversion. I've always preferred really deep connections. I've had a few friends over a lot of friends. I've always found comfort in solitary activities. I'm a big reader, love academics, like all the typical introvert traits and behaviors. But I had such a negative self-image. It was something that I was so insecure about. And I really just saw it as a blocker in my life. And I've heard this from a lot of other introverts. It's just part of growing up in a very extroverted society. And I feel like I got a double dose of that. I'm Cuban. And so it's two very extroverted cultures, Western culture and Cuban culture. So initially, I really wanted to be an extrovert. I really pushed myself to be extroverted, and there was a lot of discomfort in my life that I accepted as normal and just part of the process of succeeding. And unfortunately, a lot of those actions were reinforced. So for me, it was less of an awareness of my introversion and more of a pivot in the way that I perceived it. So that big moment came when I quit my full-time job because I had been burned out for about 10 years. And I thought, you know what? This is it. I'm going to go out on my own. I'm going to start my own business, and I'm going to take control of my life and my energy. And then I went ahead and I did the very same things that led me to introvert burnout in my full-time gig. And it was the worst experience of burnout in my 10-year career. And I think it led to this moment of radical self-acceptance where I was like, okay, I cannot keep doing this. This is going to destroy me. And that was the very first time in my life that I allowed myself to learn about my introversion and learn about it objectively, like learn about the science of introversion, and started to see it as more of an asset than a roadblock. And so I'll never forget, we were doing a staycation. We were out by the pool, and I was reading a book, and I started to read about the introverted brain and the nervous system. And that was just this light bulb moment of oh, wait, I was born like this. This is, there are things in my brain and my body that are contributing to this. And it is not something that I have to fight. It is something that I can work with. And it's just about creating the right conditions to be able to succeed and feel good doing it. And so that was a really big moment for me. So I think, yeah, it was more about that shift in perspective. Because I've always been a quiet, introverted person. I just didn't really like it at first.
Radical self-acceptance. I love that. Talk just a little bit more about what were the things that were burning you out?
Yeah, that is a long list. But I
Yeah.
think, I think at the core of it, it was this belief that the person I was not enough. It was, not she wasn't a likable person. She wasn't a capable person, and she needed to be more like her extroverted colleagues. So there was a lot of putting myself in social settings, even when I was exhausted, because that's what people did. And so I was in marketing and advertising for 10 years, and team happy hours and client happy hours and mixers and networking events, like those were all very, very common. And so I would put myself in those situations. Really was not prioritizing high quality rest or alone time, and was working way beyond my limits. Again, just like trying to keep up with my extroverted colleagues and thinking if I work harder than them, then I'll compensate for the fact that I get tired when I'm around clients after a while, or business travel really wears me out and I'm not the brightest person at a client dinner. Um, there was also a lot of, I think when we get into a state where we're energetically drained and we're pushing through and we're thinking I have to work harder, there are a lot of things that, at least for me and for some of the clients that I've worked with, a lot of like basic self-care kind of goes out the window. You start to sacrifice, you don't take lunch because now you're going to work through it because you want to prove that you're just as capable as somebody else. Or don't exercise or don't drink water because you're too busy caught up in the work and the overwhelm that you forgot to get up and drink water. So a lot of those, I think, self-care things too just went out the window. And that coupled with then other factors like I'm a thinking introvert. So I'm going to go down the rabbit hole sometimes and have some perfectionistic tendencies. I'm very detail oriented. And that also created some tension, right? Because there's this expectation that you're going to move quickly in marketing and advertising. You're agile. You're going to think on your feet and be quick and witty and smart. And so, smart in quotations. And so there are a lot of factors, I would say, but at the core of it was just pretending to be someone I was not, because I just did not know how to work with the person I was and see the best in who I am.
Yes. Wow. You said so much there. So we're going to get into all of that throughout this episode. But first, how did you find the resources that you needed for this radical self-acceptance?
Yeah, so I am a reader. That is my form of my favorite solitary and activity for high quality rest. So I just started to read books on the subject of introversion. And that was very helpful for me. I was working with a wonderful coach at the time, a career coach who was helping me transition from a full-time job to being a business owner. And that was a very valuable resource. But I think having some information about introversion specifically, because that was not her area of expertise, like I supplemented that with all of this research around introversion. And then tiny habits is a method that I'm sure we'll talk about a little later, but that was another really important tool for me in this process, because once I learned so much about my introversion and what it meant, I still needed a really practical way to design this life, right? That was now going to work with my introversion, not against it. And tiny habits gave me that tool that I needed to be able to create new behaviors, create new habits, stop old ones that I no longer wanted, and work with my introversion.
So while we're on the subject, what is a tiny habit?
So tiny habit is so interesting because it is truly a tiny version. So it takes 30 seconds or less. It's a tiny version of a behavior that you want to create, or a habit that you want to build. And the way that it works is you take the behavior that you want to create or the habit that you want to build, you break it down into that 30-second or less version. You find a place in your life where it can fit naturally, and then you nurture it, and it grows from there. And what makes it so cool is there is so much content out there that says if you want to create a new behavior, you have to push through and suffer through 21 days, and then it's imprinted on your brain and you're good to go. And that's really not true. Research has shown that that is not the most effective way to build habits. The way the tiny habits method approaches it, which is you actually start really small and you eliminate all the discomfort. You don't push through, you don't white knuckle your way through this process. You make it enjoyable by celebrating the fact that you're creating change in your life. That is what is going to lead to that long lasting change. That's going to give your habit time to really take root. And it grows over time, is the other factor here. But even if you have a hard day, the fact that you already started with a tiny version means you have something to fall back on. So even if you grow it to be this big behavior, let's say you hit a busy season, which is so normal and natural, you can always keep your habit in place by just doing the tiny version for, as long as you need to get back to the place where you can do the bigger version of it again.
And what's an example of a tiny habit, and how does this apply to being an introvert? What's different about developing a tiny habit or a need for a tiny habit being an introvert?
So I think why this method excited me so much at first and why I felt it would be so relevant for introverts is that creating changes in our behavior, it takes energy. It requires us to expel energy. It's mental, it's emotional, it's physical even. And as introverts, we have to be really mindful of our energy. So the fact that this is a way to start really tiny to manage that change in a way that's sustainable and that is not going to completely drain you, that is why I think it's so valuable for introverts. And, an example of a tiny habit that an introvert might implement, and I think this is one of my personal favorites, is, have you ever been in a meeting where they give you all this information to process, and then they're like, "Hey, what do you think?" And they want you to answer in the moment.
Oh, I have been there. Yes.
Okay. So that was and continues to be one of the most draining things for me. And it's come up with clients as well, right? That feeling of like that deer in headlights. My brain is still working to get through all this information. And now you want me to give you my opinion. So one of those tiny habits that I've created and has helped people implement is you come up with a script that sounds really, really, really thoughtful and smart. And in that moment, you just respond with your script and you celebrate yourself for doing it. So here's what it kind of sounds like. After I'm asked to give my opinion on the spot, I will respond by saying, "That's a great question. And I want to give you the best, most thoughtful answer. Is it okay if I take the day to think about this and get back to you?" And then you do something to celebrate yourself. It could be thinking like, "Man, I'm awesome," or "I am taking such great care of myself," or you can clap quietly under the table. But just to make yourself feel proud of the fact that you just stood up for yourself and set a boundary and protected your energy. And the fact that you have it scripted ahead of time just makes it so easy to spit that out without having to think about it. And that's how it works. You kind of automate some of these behaviors based on what's going on in your life already.
Yeah, I love that. And you know what? We're going to talk about this, but you said, you're a deep thinker, and that's what introversion is. We're deep thinkers. Some of us are more deep feelers or both. And we need some time to think. We don't always, like sometimes if you've given something a lot of thought, our conversation today, we probably could do this without much thought ahead of time because we've given it a lot of thought. But sometimes we might need a moment. And if that's in your script, hey, give me a moment to think about that, or I'll call you tomorrow. That's so empowering. But for the longest time, I didn't know how to do that. And we've both been through that where, we were caught and somebody wants an immediate answer. But we can assure them, I'm going to give you a well thought out answer and it's going to be really good, but
Yes.
I don't have it right now. So let me think about that. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a saving phrase for us sometimes. Let me think about that.
Yeah. And how good does that sound, right? Who doesn't want, one thing I realized is to add on to what you've said is initially in my career, I thought the faster I am on my feet, the more people will see me as a valuable asset. And now it's the opposite, right? I've accepted people want thoughtful answers, right? And it differs based on like the industry you're in and if you're a surgeon, right? People probably want you to be able to react in the moment. But for me in marketing and advertising, I was like, the most value I can provide is to be thoughtful in my response and to give my clients good recommendations that are based in research or that are based in, just solid reflection and analysis. And so, yeah, it's also accepting that's not a bad thing. Asking for that time to think, you're just being of service, of value. You're doing something for the greater good, the best for everybody.
Yeah. And I've given this a lot of thought lately, and it's like, we're not always going to need time to think. I always say that because sometimes, I'll share my process and people, oh, you need time to think about that, almost in a negative way. And it's like, no. But what will happen is you share that, you do some great work, and you will start to be respected for it. And people will
Mhm.
look to that as your gift. And of course, a lot of that we can also prepare ahead of time for things. That's really important in all this. But you can only prepare so much. We're not going to be able to change without preparation with something new to us. We're not going to think faster. That's not our gift. But again, let's talk about our gifts. A gift of ours is to think deeply. And again, if you do it and you show people, they will start to look for you like, oh yeah, Jess is going to come up with something great here. So I will let her have some time to think about that.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
Um,
And it's a huge confidence builder too, taking those
yeah.
little steps.
So a part of all this is like finding out what our strengths are. So what would you say is a strength that you've discovered that you have because you're an introvert, or maybe a strength that you've seen in other introverts that you're working with?
Yeah. Well, I think for me, one thing that has helped me, and it's one of those things that I was frustrated about at first, and now I value it so deeply, is my ability to think through something A to Z and turn over every stone. And the more, you know, it's so funny to me because um, I'm the kind of person who's like, I want all the information. Give me all the information. I'll take it, I'll process it, I'll think about it. And then I'll give you a really detailed response. Or, I can scale it back to the need to know, but I'll have considered every possible factor and outcome. And, as I progressed through my career, despite everything that was going on, I will say the work that I found the most rewarding and engaging was like customer experience work that was that A to Z thinking of how do you move the customer through this journey and how do they, so that was just, and I think that's also helped tremendously with coaching clients and thinking about programs is really being able to think about what my clients experience, from beginning to end, with the caveat that everybody's situation is unique. But, there are some, I would say, consistencies in our journey as introverts, especially through that self-discovery period. And I'd say that's something I see a lot in my clients. They're also really thoughtful people. And I think that's such an introverted strength, creative and thorough and fair. I think that's also something that I've identified. Excellent writers. Yeah, there are so many of those introverted strengths, I think, that are present in my clients.
I relate to that so much. Like, I also like to have all of the information. And sometimes I've been given a hard time, like, just make a decision. I'm like, oh, I need to know this and this too. So I relate very much to that.
Thank you for saying that, because I had, that is one of my bigger, especially when I was doing marketing consulting, that was one of the biggest pushbacks that I got. It was like, well, just make a decision. And I'm like, no, I want all the information I need to know just in case. And I just think it's such a part of the thought process.
Yeah. So we definitely talk about the strengths and needs of introverts, and we're talking about that. We'll get into some of your strategies for success that you share with your coaching clients. But another part of the show is we bust myths here. So is there a myth or two you want to bust about introversion?
I do. The one that really, if I had to pick one that's at the very top of my list, it's this idea that introverts are not, they're anti-people or they're incapable of socializing. And that is, I found, the misconception that tends to stick in people's minds the most. And the reason why it really is something that I'm trying to this thing that I'm trying to dispel is because it is not only such a negative perception of introverts. We are very capable of building strong and just strong and rich and deep connections and having these really beautiful relationships with other people, but also it's so limiting. And I say that in the sense that when you only, when somebody only focuses on introverts being anti-people or not good with people or not good in social settings, they completely eliminate conversations about other energy drains that our society has normalized that are still really common and really harmful. So if we're only focusing on this one facet, we're not thinking about things like technology, how our use of technology throughout the workday and in our personal lives, how that drains us, or how the way our environments are set up in favor of extroverts, how those could potentially drain us. How, even things like some of the boundaries that we've been taught not to set, especially at work, how those affect us. And so for me, I'm like, we're not anti-people. And there's so much more out there that actually contributes to the experience. And, and I will say this, when I've spoken to clients about this, the reason why they sometimes feel uncomfortable in social settings is because they're already showing up to them drained. They're not doing the things in their personal life. They're not giving themselves permission, and they're not also having the cooperation from their environment to be able to recharge their energy enough to show up to that social setting and experience it. It hurts because they're already at an energy deficit. And so that's the other thing too. It's like, it completely cuts. It just is such a limiting misconception that one's the one that if I could just eliminate it from the conversation and replace it with this idea of, we are more than capable of socializing and having great connections, I would 100%. That would be my one wish if there were a genie.
Yeah, it's a pretty silly misconception. Of course we like people. We're humans. We need people.
Yeah.
We often want deeper connections. and that's true. And we might not want as much social time, and that's fine too, but we all absolutely need connections with other people, and we enjoy them. We might prefer the deeper ones, but it's crazy to think that people think that we don't like people. And that's actually when I started this podcast, because we were in the middle of the pandemic, and I was hearing all these things just like this, like, oh, introverts, they must be loving this. And I'm like, no, I know a lot of lonely introverts right now that they're not getting the connection they need because, of the pandemic. And so that's when I started this podcast, to start busting some of those myths. And that's one of my big ones too.
I love that you bring that up, David. That was one of the most frustrating aspects of, that narrative around working from home and being in quarantine. I was like, no, this is hard for us too. And you're right in saying that we do need that connection. So I love that that was one of your motivators.
Yeah. And I mean, so here I am. My wife always works from home. She has for many, many years. And I have three kids, and two of them were now in online school, which they did not like. And the five of us, which I love, there's no people that I'd rather be with than, my wife and my three kids. But it was a tight situation. And now we're in my wife's territory, that she's a fellow introvert. She's used to having some peace and quiet throughout different parts of her day. And it was crazy. But again, I'm with my family, but there were so many other people that my other family and friends that I wasn't seeing, and it was isolating. And so, but definitely busting those myths here. And you were also hitting on some other things. Let's talk about the energy, and let's see. Is it a workshop you have?
Yeah, so it is a program where I teach introverted people uh, how to go from feeling drained on a daily basis to feeling more energized, and really work with them to create a daily experience that is going to lead them to that place of energy through creating new habits, stopping old habits and old patterns and behaviors, and also through some self acceptance work as well, right? Because that's another big component of it. But the goal is something I learned, especially during that last little bit of burnout that I experienced, was, and this is going to sound so obvious, but at the time it was such a profound just revelation for me, was this idea that like your daily experience is your life. And I think, at least coming from a more corporate career path, we live for the evenings, we live for the weekends, we live for vacation, and kind of dismiss what goes on during our work days. And we just think that's how it is. It's going to be painful and it's going to be uncomfortable. And I was like, no, it's not. It doesn't have to be that way. And that makes up my life. That makes up our lives. So helping people create these daily experiences that help them just show up in ways that don't hurt them, that don't drain them, or manage the drain. That's a big part of this program.
Yeah, and we should enjoy every day. It's no kind of life when you're only living for the weekends. Or the worst thing, I hear people say, "Oh, I can't wait till retirement." They're a young person and it's years away. And I'm like, "No, you need to enjoy every day." There's always going to be things that we don't like to do and the things that we have to take care of in this life. But if for the most part you can enjoy your life every day, like I love that you're saying every day. So tell us about that. How does an introvert set up their life to enjoy every day?
Well, before I jump into that, it's so funny you mentioned that bit about retirement. We were out to dinner last night and we walked past a luxury senior living facility. And I looked at my husband and I was like, I don't understand. I was like, I want to have a great life when I'm older and retired. I do. I want
Yeah,
to have a
absolutely.
wonderful life. I want to enjoy myself, but also like, I don't want to wait until I'm older and retired to be able to have these happy days and these moments of leisure. And so I just love that you brought that up. It felt very just like a really fun coincidence. But Just as far as setting up your days as an introvert, there are five main things that I work with my clients on, and they are managing thoughts or beliefs that are going to push you to act out of alignment. So, getting clear on what those are for each person, and then coming up with ways to kind of dial down that noise, that inner noise of I'm not enough, or I need to do it this way, or I should be doing it that way. I shouldn't be resting. I haven't earned this rest, that kind of thinking. Then there is managing overstimulation. So making sure that you're not allowing more stimuli than you need to or that you want to in your life. Figuring out the best way to set boundaries for yourself. A lot of the work that we do is around creating those scripts once clients have identified where they feel like their boundaries are being busted or where they'd like to set some limits. But really making sure that clients are empowered to actively communicate what they don't want and where they, want people to meet them. Then there's the relationship with rest. So making sure that rest is a priority and that those feelings of guilt around rest are toned down, kind of rewriting that relationship. And the fifth thing is having tools for self-soothing. And I mean that because as introverts, as we learn to stand up for ourselves to help, dispel some of those misconceptions, the reality is we do live in an extroverted culture, and there are going to be moments where there's friction, where things happen or people say things that trigger us or affect us. And so having the right tools that are going to help self-soothe us, that's really important as well, to be able to get through those moments without energy drain.
Yeah, I love that. That's gold right there, those five things. So you also talk a lot about overwhelm, and I think probably those five things can help you not be overwhelmed. Is that accurate?
Yes, absolutely. And so for me, I think the connection between overwhelm and introversion is this, once you're feeling overwhelmed, chances are, and there are a lot of factors that contribute to overwhelm. I don't want to oversimplify it, but
Right.
as it pertains to introversion, it's typically a sign that you're in a state of energy deficit, you're experiencing an introvert hangover, or you're close to introvert burnout. The reason being is if you're overstimulated and under rested, you're operating from an empty tank, your battery is drained, you're, in an energy deficit. And so naturally, you're not going to be able to meet external and internal demands, and it's going to start to feel overwhelming. And so I do think that is all interconnected, and really there's focusing on overstimulation, rest, and setting boundaries is probably that first stage of managing that introvert overwhelm, and being able to move away from that.
Definitely. So is that what you would say if someone finds themselves in overwhelm? Is that the strategy on how to start to get out of it?
Yes, absolutely. So I think I look at it as a two-phased approach. But the first phase is really dialing down the noise. And I mean that literally and metaphorically. So overstimulation, cutting out a lot of things that could be just potentially draining you from, maybe it's putting your cell phone on do not disturb. Maybe it's staying off social media for a little bit, or cutting out the news, or booking a conference room at work if you're in an open office floor plan. That was one of my best strategies when I was working in advertising. I would just book conference rooms for the day and I would disappear. So dialing down the literal noise.
Just 1 second though. Talking about living in an extroverted world. Who thinks that this is a good idea in the open office plan? It's just not effective. We need some time to think. And I always think, you know what? Everybody should just have an office, but have spaces where you could go and collaborate when you need to. But yeah, I just couldn't let that one go because I know you probably have given that a lot of thought. It's not a great plan for us introverts to not have some. We need some time to think. We need some time to collaborate. Yes, absolutely. But we need some focused time to do a lot of things.
100%. That is one of my biggest, that was one of my biggest frustrations was every agency that I worked in had an open office floor plan. And I was like, okay, clearly an extrovert designed this because just seeing people walk back and forth all day, that alone was draining because it kept pulling me out of deep work. And so, yeah, it's one of those things. My very first gig in advertising, they had their offices were built. I think they were built, maybe in the 90s, and every person did get their own office, regardless of your level of seniority. Um, and what I mean, something I took for granted. What a treat
Yeah.
to be able to close the door to my office, turn off the lights, sit on the floor, and just work in quiet and peace. I definitely took that for granted in my early 20s. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So, just going back to how to navigate out of overwhelm. So, first, it's dialing down the literal noise, and then, I think the next step is, and what I always start with clients is starting to build that habit of rest. And when I say rest, I mean sleep is super important. Absolutely do not want to dismiss sleep, but also high quality rest that engages your mind, engages your body, your senses. It's this almost like getting into a flow state through some kind of activity that's not work related so that your brain can just shut down that thinking for a little bit. Someone that the coach that I worked with to transition into entrepreneurship, she talks about it as stress debt, and I think that's such a brilliant, simple way to illustrate it. So, when we're in stress debt, it's all of the stress accumulated in our body, and that high quality rest is paying down stress debt. It's helping our body just relax and come out of that state. So, working with clients to figure out what high quality rest looks like for them. Is it reading? Is it writing? Is it knitting? Is it biking? Is it adult coloring books? Actually, are really effective. Just something that can get you out of that thinking pattern, that cognitive loop from work. And then the last thing is really focusing on what's important in that moment. Matching your effort to your energy is what I call it. So being honest with yourself about where you're at energetically and looking at your to-do list and thinking, okay, what can I do within the energy that I have? And or how can I think about what I have to do differently so it doesn't take up more energy that I have available in this moment. That's really stage one or phase one, where you're just getting your body out of that state of fight or flight that you find yourself in when you're overwhelmed.
Yeah. And I think you just mentioned the to-do list. I think that can be a big part of overwhelm. A lot of the overwhelm comes when you're trying to do everything and we can't do everything. And you really have to prioritize some things. What do I really need to get done? And that's something that's really helped me out of overwhelm, is realizing, yeah, what's most important.
That is such a valuable question to ask yourself every day. And even that could be a tiny habit. After I open my to-do list, I'll ask myself, what is most important? Another one I like to teach clients is, after I add something to my to-do list, I'll ask myself, what's the truth about this deadline? To give themselves permission to ask, like, is this self-imposed? Is this really critical? Or am I creating the pressure in the system here? And yeah, so to your point, just giving yourself permission to be really specific about where your energy does go, because we only have so much of it every day. and we cannot get to everything, at least not without having all of these harmful effects on our being.
So you implement these different tiny habits. How do you make it so that these tiny habits and the habits that you're developing last? Do you have some strategies for that just to keep it all going?
Yes. So first, the thing that's going to help these really take hold, and I think I had mentioned this earlier, but the most popular myths about habit formation, they focus on, they say push through, right? Do it for 21 days, no matter what. You have to show up and just get through it, grit your teeth, that kind of mentality. And really what helps habits grow is the complete opposite. It is feeling
Right.
good and proud of yourself. And so in the tiny habits method, right after you do your tiny behavior, you celebrate. And this, it can be tricky for some people, especially if you've got to go big or go home mindset. So it takes a little bit of practice. And I think sometimes too, it's easy to confuse it with like an incentive or a reward. This is really about acknowledging your success internally and creating a feeling that is either accomplishment or pride or joy or happiness, really reinforcing the behavior positively through emotion, because that's what's going to help it stick. The really interesting bit is that when you start to feel successful, even doing this one tiny habit, and it can be as simple as straightforward as a habit to, you know, floss your teeth. That's a really popular tiny habit recipe that's not related to introversion, but people find a lot of success in. I know. And there's another one that's really popular too, which is after you flush the toilet, you'll do 2 squats or 2 push-ups. So again, it's just feeling really good about yourself. And that good feeling starts to seep into other areas of your life. It starts to improve your self confidence, your self worth. It starts to show you that you are capable of change. And so I think working with my introverted clients, having them start with these tiny habits, even if a couple of them aren't directly related to introversion, that is going to create this ripple effect of, yeah, I can change these circumstances for the better, and I'm not stuck in this lifestyle or this way of being necessarily.
Yeah, I love that. So it's really doing the thing, but acknowledging, hey, you know what? This is good. This felt good.
Yeah,
Celebrating it, and this is something I'm going to keep doing.
exactly. Like you said, that acknowledgement of what you did, I think we're so drawn to defining ourselves by what we don't do or what we're not. But this is really all about acknowledging what you did do to create a better life for yourself, to protect your energy, to honor your boundaries and your limits. Like it's all about what you actually did. And that is so powerful.
Yeah, and honoring the great gifts that you have as an introvert. You know what? This is something that may be unique to me, but it's amazing. And if I do these things, I can really use my gift and that kind of thing, and
Yeah.
protect my energy at the same time.
Yes.
Hey, Jess, we've talked about so many great things today. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you would like to?
There is one thing that I'd like to bring up, and I touched on it a little earlier, but I think it's something that, I don't often hear in the conversation around introversion. And maybe it's more of just an acknowledgement to any of your listeners who are bridging the gap between Western culture and the culture that, their family is from or they were born into. When you're doing that, like when you're kind of straddling these two cultures and they're both very extroverted, it's almost like you get double the pressure. You get it from both sides. And so I just want to say to any of your listeners who are first generation or generation 1.5, like you are so capable and worthy of setting those boundaries and protecting yourself, even if your family doesn't get it. Because, it's when we're experiencing extrovert bias from society, that's one thing, but when it's from your family, that can contribute some additional, things to navigate. And so I just wanted to say that's another very valid piece of the conversation. And when you're doing that, that it's still very important to take care of yourself, even if your
Yeah.
family doesn't quite get it. So shout out to any of your Hispanic introverted listeners.
Okay. Well said. That was an epiphany I had. Even in families, we come to our strengths naturally. So, like I said, I have an introverted wife and probably two extroverted children and one introvert. And, they came to those gifts and they're all amazing in their own ways, but they came to those gifts on their own. They were born with those gifts, and it wasn't because we raised any of them differently or anything like that. And so even within families, there's different strengths and personalities, and we need to promote a lot more understanding around that. So thank you for saying that.
I love that. That's so interesting that, some of your kids are extroverted.
Yeah, yeah, and it's natural. So tell us, how can we find out more about the work you're doing and the things you're offering?
Well, anybody who wants to learn more about my work, my site is a really good place to start, introvertscan.co, .co, no M. And I have a blog that I update weekly and am constantly sharing insights and strategies there, a lot of tiny habits content, if that's of interest to any of your listeners. And for anybody who does want to connect in, DMs over Instagram or LinkedIn, I'm so open to that. So you can check out Introverts Can on Instagram at introverts.can. And then they can just look me up on LinkedIn at Jess Cabrera. Should come up. It'll say introverts in my
Yeah.
headline. So it's a common name, but I don't, not a
Yeah,
lot of us
I
are
will.
talking about introversion.
Yeah, yeah, I will put that all in the show notes.
Oh, thank
And I
you.
love the name Introverts Can. That's an awesome name.
Thank you. Yeah, that was, again, was this feeling of like, yeah, I can do this. Anybody, because and I think just as a last note, when I was going to make the jump from full-time employment to being a business owner, I spoke to some of my introverted colleagues and they're like, I could never do that. I'm an introvert. How are you? You must not be an introvert was, kind of the conversation. And I was like, no, I am an introvert. And yes, we can. And we're going to do it. So it was,
Yeah, I
yeah,
love that.
very
Just a
important.
little more understanding about your approach to success. Jess, thank you so much for being on the show today. This has been a wonderful conversation. I could probably talk to you for a couple more hours, but we'll save some more for later. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to further connecting with you. Reach out at david@quietandstrong.com or check out the quietandstrong.com website, which includes blog posts, links to social media, and other items. Send me topics or guests you would like to see on the show. If you're interested in getting to know yourself better, there's now a free Type Finder personality assessment on the Quiet and Strong website. This free assessment will give you a brief report, including the 4-letter Myers-Briggs code. I'll add a link to the show notes. There's so many great things about being an introvert, so we need those to be understood. Get to know your introverted strengths and needs and be strong.